So here we go. I think everything's ready. Very warm welcome to those of you who just joined us and who missed a personal welcome and greeting. And especially if this is your first time with my Saturday mornings, I hope you enjoy, and an extra warm welcome to you. So today we start on 7 teachings to do with the practice of forearm Chenrezig. It's most of the past year and a half, we've been looking at Buddhist theory. We had one departure to learn the Tonglen practice, so that was practice instructions. And so it's I don't know what the word is. It's a pleasure, it's a joy, it's a sacred responsibility for me to pass on to you instructions for actually practicing the Dharma. So it's a little bit different in terms of flavor, of course. And as we'll see today, Chenrezig is the very most perfect embodiment of compassion. And compassion is what all of our Dharma path is about. There is nothing which is not a part of compassion. And if I find the quote, then there's a quote from the Buddha who tells us just how all of his teachings, all of his practice, everything that we have in Dharma is here for the development of compassion. So it's very, very important that through our loving care for all of our fellow beings, all of them. I read the other day that in our face there's more than 1 million other sentient beings. They're little mites. They have a life. They're a sentient being. They eat. They find a partner. They mate. They reproduce. I don't know what else goes on, but they live in each little pore of the face. When you see electron microscope pictures, it's quite, but anyway, these are our past mothers and fathers, however we think of them, in the Bodhisattva teachings. So like, just now I see your faces. So I'm looking at several million beings, but most of them are too small to see, thank goodness. I think if we could see each other's faces with microscopic eyes, it might be quite different. So anyway, it's very important that we enter into these teachings with a great loving care for all of our fellow beings. And then, as you know, if you're a regular, but I think I need to repeat it now, in particular, as we start out on a teaching, then we need three kind of forces present, 3 things. One is a big mind. A big mind. Many of you know, of course, we can't even find mind. So big one, small one, what on earth does that mean? Well, it does mean something. It means this. Your mind, your heart, if you want to say, in Buddhism it's the same thing, is big because it's inclusive. If we include one other being, then there's ourselves, and one other is doubled. If we include 2 others, it's tripled. So our mind is big because very sincerely we are working on including more and more of our fellow beings in our motivation, our driving force to practice Dharma. So you've seen many times in the teachings and the prayers that we talk about all sentient beings, or each and every sentient being. Of course. But when we come down to Dharma practice, and once you start really opening your mind, thinking clearly, thinking intelligently, practicing and opening your sensitivity, you will realize that this word, all sentient beings, it's an abstract notion. We can think it, we've not got a clue what it means. Like just now, maybe some of you discovered about the tiny bugs in our face pores. You know, there's so many different types of sentient being. And just like when you meet humans, did you ever meet two humans the same? Never. So what all sentient beings means, we have a long way to discover. Just now, it's a nice idea. You know, I'm practicing for everyone. Nice idea. So in making the nice idea the reality of the bodhisattva, where you really are connected in many ways with other beings, then what we need to include are those beings that we've known and that we know. They're very, very important. Here we are, plunged in this life, embodied in this bag of meat and bones that you're living in just now. It was born, it will die. You'll be in another one and another one. Maybe you'll have fur, maybe you'll have wings, maybe you'll be like something like this again. Maybe you'll be very different if you're a human being. Just now, we're in this one with our parents, with our brothers and sisters. And then through the power of karma, this body of ours meets the bodies of others and things happen, relationships form. Sometimes nice, sometimes blessing, sometimes help, sometimes not nice, sometimes trouble. Every being we meet, human beings, animals, are very special to us. They're our karma, they're part of our mind. So we need to be thinking first and foremost of bringing them to liberation, and then extending from the ones we've actually met and experienced with great gratitude because they've taught us about life, sentient life. Then we can extend our thoughts to beings we can only imagine. So when we do seriously enter into Dharma, then we think of our father, our mother, brothers and sisters right next to us. We kind of feel them, smell them, get the taste of the fact that we are here for them, and so on. So anyway, a big mind is more and more inclusive. And then a loving mind, because as we include everybody, no matter who they are, then what we are aiming for is to love them with the best love we can possibly muster every time, every moment. No matter what they did to us, who they are, we are here for liberation of ourselves. It won't happen until we have nothing but love for everyone. That is liberation. It doesn't come in a Christmas package. We have to work for it very hard. So we include, or we learn to include everyone, right up to the very worst, with love for them. So big mind, a loving mind, and then most of all, a happy mind. A happy mind. Why happy? Because we have Dharma. All the rest comes, goes. Everyone else comes, goes. Even our gurus come, go. Even Buddha came, went. Good fortune comes, goes. Horrible times come, go. Everything is impermanent except Dharma, because it comes from the timeless, changeless cosmic truths, and it joins us, and in particular through the Chenrezig practice, joins us with what is true, with what is trustworthy, with what is lasting. So in this vast sea of existence and people who are striving so hard for a bit of happiness in the world, we found the Dharma. It's incredible. And it should make you so happy so that every morning when you wake up, no matter what your circumstances, what your health, what's happening in the world around you, your immediate home world, you have the joy of Dharma that we'll take with us when this body dies, when this story ends, and we go into the bardo, and we go on to next lives. Dharma stays with us. It's beautiful, beyond description. It's powerful, beyond description. So anyway, with a big mind, and a loving mind, and a very, very happy mind, then let's do our beginning prayers, and wishing to learn this Chenrezig practice so that we become more and more of a light to the world, a light to our fellow beings. Sonje chodan soje chonomla, Jancho badu dame japsanje, Dage jinso jipe sonhamje, Prola penchera sonje druparasho. Sonje chodan soje chonamla, Jancho badu dame japsanje, Dage jinso jipe sonhamje, Prola penchera sonje druparasho. Sonje chodan soji chonamla, Jancho badu dane chapsanje, Dagi jinso jipe sonamje, Drola penchera sonje druparashu. Semchen tamche dewa dang dewe ju dang dem parajuche, Dongal dang dongal ji ju dang chalwara juche, Dongal me pe dewa tampa dang men chalwara juche, Yerin chadan ne tang chalwe, Tanyom chempola ne parajuche. Deyata shame shamavati shameta shadru Am kure marajite karuta ke ore Tejo wati ola yani beshuddha nimale malapanaye Kukure kaka grase grasana muki paramuki Amuki shamatavane sawagraha bandhanane negrita Sawa bara pravadina vimukta marapasha Savita buddha mudrano katita Sava mare butsarita parishuddhi Biga shantu sava marakama. Alen sawe lama rinpoche Dage chewara pende denshola Kadran chempo gone jezonte Kuson tuje ngadrup saldo sol. Thank you very much. So then, where to start? Where to start? We'll be learning the Chenrezig practice. So there are two ways I could start. Top down, by talking about Chenrezig, and then homing in on this particular practice. Or from the bottom up, whereby I start with compassion and sort of work up to the practice. I think maybe we'll start with compassion. Normally, it's the sort of job of a Dharma teacher when we come to a new practice to introduce you to where it came from, who it came from, the lineage, where it sits in the scheme of things, and then to tell you the benefits. That's kind of my job remit for this morning. It's what you need to know about the practice before we actually learn how to do it. So I think we should start with compassion. And of course, I think any decent human being, Buddhist or not Buddhist, will understand the value of compassion or of love. We can use loosely both terms, either term. Compassion is a development of love, and love is something treasured, valued, and especially, how can you say, a pure love, a divine love for our fellow beings. So love means we care, really. When you look at the word like caritas in Latin, and the caring and the charity and the feeling of being alive so we can help others. So generally, love is defined in Dharma, as you know, I think, through this longing to bring well-being to our fellow beings. A long life, good health, friendship, right connections, respect, to be in times of peace, and so on and so on. All the list of the good worldly things. We care for them. We want to help the world and other beings be a better place. So in Dharma, we deepen this notion of universal love by taking it into compassion. And compassion is a deeper sensitivity because it comes from our exploration of what is well-being. When is somebody well? And when aren't they well? Compassion is an understanding of the suffering that goes on. Even if someone has good health, even if someone has money, even if somebody lives in a time of prosperity and peace, and so on, are they well in themselves? So we explore suffering, and in depth, all the levels of suffering, suffering when it actually hurts, suffering when it doesn't hurt yet, but it's in the pipeline. It's like the famous thing heard through an open window on a skyscraper, and somebody was falling from the roof. The person was heard saying, "So far, so good, so far, so good." And of course, they're falling. And so karma may not be ripened yet. But if it's there, and if it's bad karma, the suffering's bound to come. So we're aware of not just the trouble people are in, but the trouble they're getting themselves into, to put it in very everyday terms, the problems they're creating for themselves and others. And then we're aware of the existential suffering, and this is the biggest one for us Buddhists, that people are not enjoying the wealth of mind that they could be enjoying. Their minds are stuck in desire and pride and jealousy and so on, whereas there is such a natural wealth of happiness we call Dharma. So anyway, this sensitivity to suffering deepens our love and our loving care for other beings. So we call that compassion. And we want to help people never to suffer anymore and to remove the causes of future suffering from their mind stream. Love becomes compassion. But then compassion becomes bodhicitta, because the raw and powerful truth of it hits us. Okay, I love everybody, and I'm more and more aware of the suffering that's there in existence. What can I do? What can I do? And of course, some people change their lives. They leave well-paid jobs and things. They go out into helping work of one sort or another, whereby they are more in service to their fellow beings rather than just feathering their own nests. But then when we really think about it, according to the Lord Buddha's teaching, then the finest thing that we can ever do to help all of our fellow beings be well and to get out of suffering forever is to free and enlighten our own being, our own karma, our own story, our own mind. We look back very practically over the whole history of humanity that we can know. Of course, we can only know a fraction of it. And we ask ourselves a simple question. I ask myself, Ken, I say, look, I'm here alive. I'm human. In the very best of circumstances, what can I do with this life? And I look back through history and I'm saying, I'm going to take the best human that ever existed, the most useful. Not just that, what do I respect? Wisdom, the wisest human. And what do I respect? Kindness and loving care in somebody's hearts, the most caring human, and so on. And I'm going to take that person as my model. And when we look back, who helped in human history other beings the most? We go back through all of our famous humans, and as far as we can see, nobody helped more than Buddha helped. He was the most useful human being that ever lived, through helping other people help themselves by mastering their mind and their story, their life stream, their stream of consciousness. Those people he helped other people, and it's still going on, and it's never ending. In his life, he helped hundreds of thousands of people. And through his teachings, billions upon billions. So Buddha is our model. So with bodhicitta, we orient everything we are and everything we can do towards becoming Buddha to help all beings. So this you know from the Bodhisattva teachings that we've been through together. And I won't develop it anymore. It's a huge topic. But in the Bodhisattva path and in our Bodhisattva vow, we promise that we are going to help all beings through what? Through the practice of the 6 paramitas, that our compassion, which we feel, which moves us, which is our driving force, will become not just a compassionate state of mind, but a compassionate life. So we have compassion in action, or bodhicitta in action. And so we embody that in the 6 paramitas. So now our love, our loving care, become compassion, becomes bodhicitta, and bodhicitta becomes embodied in the practice of the 6 paramitas that in some of our courses last year we explored, not at some length, but we had a good exploration together. It's wonderful. But then if you really want to help all of these fellow beings and to free your own mind in the process, then we follow the bodhisattva path. How long will it take? Well, quite a lot of lifetimes. Lovely lifetimes, gets better and better as we go from life to life. But then we find that bodhicitta can be practiced, can be fulfilled. The journey of hundreds, maybe thousands of lifetimes along the bodhisattva path can be compacted and lived out and worked through and made true in just a handful of lives through what we call Vajrayana practice. So now we're looking at Vajrayana practice, and in particular, Vajrayana practice that is totally focused on, is a total expression of compassion. The way we will develop compassion is that. Now, I wanted to read you a couple of quotes. I think in this course you'll get more quotes than you usually get from me. Usually you get Ken's explanation of something, which kind of helps you to think and make your own explanation. But there's great blessing in the quotes. And, Chenrezig practice is over the top. What can happen, what it can promise, is not reasonable. If you can only do reasonable, logical mind, it might not be so easy. So anyway, quotes help you understand that what I'm saying is not just Ken's pie-eyed version of compassion and Dharma and Chenrezig. It's what the Buddha said. So one very famous quote is one that's meant a lot to me over the years, comes from a text called The Text Discussing the Realization of the Lord of the World. Now, Lord of the World is one of the names of Chenrezig, Lokeshvara. Loke is Sanskrit for the world, and Ishvara means Lord. So we call him Avalokiteshvara, or Lokeshvara means Lord of the world. So it's a text discussing the realization of Chenrezig. And it says, were there one thing, like all the enlightened qualities, right there in the palm of your hand, where you can say, and then, the quote, what would it be? Answer, great compassion. Were there one thing like all the enlightened qualities in the palm of one's hand, what would it be? Great compassion. So it's like whatever we've got in Dharma, all of the practices, whatever they may be, the wrathful ones, the peaceful ones, the pure practice, shamatha, mindfulness, all of them, any one of them, you can say, why is that there? The answer, like something you could, let me find something nice here, a nice crystal. One thing you could say, that's it. That's it. What would that be? It would be compassion. In fact, it says great compassion. So when we study compassion, there's compassion and there's great compassion, there's limitless compassion, and there's unconditional compassion. And then there is the natural compassion of the Buddha's mind. So anyway, compassion is everything. Compassion is the path, but then the path that leads us to the result is compassion. So when we consider what is Chenrezig, we can consider the result. So Chenrezig is the embodiment of compassion of all the Buddhas, all of them. Like everything that was ever compassionate that an enlightened being knew, did, all of that is gathered together. It's like a super medicine where every Buddha put in their own special ingredient. How they practice compassion through forbearance, how they practice compassion through charity and generosity and so on. It's as though every aspect of enlightened compassion was condensed into one. That's Chenrezig. That's Chenrezig. That's what we're talking about. The Buddha's compassion. Now that manifests in various forms. So many ways. But in terms of Chenrezig, the actual manifestation can be a Chenrezig with 2 arms, a Chenrezig with 4 arms, Chenrezig with 1,000 arms. It can be red, blue, white, black Chenrezig. The manifestation of compassion is endless. The compassion of all the Buddhas. And then we know in our wonderful teachers, the Karmapas, they are also a manifestation of the compassion in action of all of the Buddhas. So when we talk about the real Chenrezig, we're not talking about a shape or a form. We're talking about the real, living, enlightened compassion in its totality. That's what we are aiming for, of course. The result, the cause for that result, is to practice Chenrezig as a path. Red Chenrezig, yellow Chenrezig, black Chenrezig, 2 arms, 4 arms, whichever one it is, everyone will lead us there. But here we're looking at one very wonderful practice, which is the 4-armed form of Chenrezig. So it's my job, it's my duty to tell you about why this one, where does it come from, why is it special, and so on. But to tell you that what we're aiming for is beyond form. The compassion of all the Buddhas is something that always was, is in this very moment, right now, in you and in me as a potential. Always will be. It never changes. That's the real Chenrezig, the result. And we are learning to practice 4-armed Chenrezig as a cause for that result. Now, I just wanted to put in a little side note while I'm on this theme about all Dharma is there for compassion and how special, compassion is what it is. There's a lot of interest, I see, at least in social media, in Buddhist wisdom and the really juicy, deep teachings of the Mahasiddhas and so on, Dzogchen and Mahamudra, and the ideas and discussion, head stuff, but also deep stuff, all under the title Wisdom. And then, as you know, those of you who've been on the previous weeks, we've been studying the 5 Buddha wisdoms, 5 Buddha families. We've looked a bit more deeply at Buddha wisdom. So wisdom and compassion are sometimes talked of apart. It helps us because we live in a dualistic, divided state of mind. So for us, wisdom's one thing, and then the feeling of love and compassion maybe is not quite the same. But as we go further along the path, you won't be able to separate wisdom and compassion. And then in our own, for instance, Kagyu tradition, and also in the Dzogchen tradition, we find when you're up there in the high altitudes of philosophy, when we're wondering quite what a Buddha is in the end. Then there is this phrase in Tibetan, Tong Ni Nyingje Nyingpo Chin. It means shunyata, voidness, emptiness, that has compassion as its very heart. You can't separate. So you can't have full compassion unless you are fully wise. Wisdom is a tool to help the compassion. Remember, in Buddha's own teachings, it's all about compassion. Everything is about compassion, even wisdom development. So there's another sutra. It's called the Sutra of the Tathagata's Secrets. And it's addressed to Vajrapani, Bodhisattva, who's called Master of the Secret Teachings. Oh, Master of the Secret Teachings, the root of pristine awareness, primordial wisdom, whatever you want to call it, jhana, that knows everything, lies in compassion. The root of wisdom lies in compassion. Never forget that, please. When you're fascinated by the intellectual discussions that you find on Facebook, ask yourself, where is the love? Where is the compassion? Compassion and love open up a different sort of knowing that thought and the intellect could never get. Never. Anyway, Chenrezig embodies that. Now, that was a little detour to come back to sort of following the thread of ideas. Then the real Chenrezig result that we're aiming for is the natural compassion, however it manifests to help beings of all the Buddhas. And this is why the first Kalu Rinpoche, who was one of my teachers for this particular Chenrezig practice, at one time he burst into laughter at Samiling. And he said, please, don't think there's somebody sitting up there in space with 4 arms who has to sit there all day and all night long like this, getting armache, never able to move. There's nobody up there. Of course, we visualize, we meditate in a way that's as if there were. That's helpful for us in our relative development. But he just said, we are not like theistic faiths where there is somebody up there and that somebody is different from you. So you better blooming well pray, otherwise you're in trouble. You're in trouble. Chenrezig is not other, is not a somebody, is not a being. What Chenrezig really is this. Now, as opposed to the shape and form that's not sitting up there in space with its own private Pure Land and so on, which is only a relative idea. The real Chenrezig really is there. The compassionate activity of all the Buddhas is so real. It's supporting you and me right now. It's why we're here. It is the deepest force that brought us together with these practices. It's making your life worth living. The compassion of the Buddhas is very, very real. Our minds are usually not mature enough to experience it directly. When we achieve Mahamudra insight, Dzogchen insight, they will be utterly swept away by the magnificence of Buddha mind. So the real Chenrezig is very real, but we need a method and a form. Now, we need to see which method, which form. We're going to be learning the four-armed form of Chenrezig that comes to us from Tangtong Gyalpo. Tangtong Gyalpo. Sorry, who did you say? Tangtong Gyalpo. So maybe you never heard. Tangtong Gyalpo was one of the most famous Tibetan Buddhists ever. Some great names in Tibetan Dharma history are very much linked with a tradition, like the Sakyapas, the Sakya this, Sakya Pandita, Sakya tradition, and then the Karmapas with the Kagyu line, Karmapa Kagyu, the Karmakamsang, and so on. Tangtong Gyalpo was a one-off. There is, it's complicated, but there is a kind of a lineage of reincarnations, but it's not a big deal. From most points of view, Tangtong Gyalpo was a one-off who had an incredible influence on Tibet and Tibetan Buddhism. The way he is understood is like this. He was a direct emanation of the real Chenrezig, the compassion of all the Buddhas, embodied in a form on earth. And so his dates are mainly 15th century, 1385 to 1510. So that's, once you start doing the sums, that's 125 years. He's supposed to have lived to a very old age. He was, without any doubt, a Mahasiddha. They say he is the Tibetan, the most traveled Tibetan that ever was. Now, I think since then, maybe, for instance, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who's done a lot of jetting around the world, he might claim the new record in the Guinness Book of Records for the most traveled Tibetan Buddhist. But until recent times, Tangtong Gyalpo was famous for many things, many things. He's one of these great masters who, when you look at their life in this area, you think, how could anyone have achieved that in one lifetime? And then you look at another area and it's the same. So he was a great Buddhist master, specifically in several traditions. His own training was within the Sakya tradition, the formal Buddhist training. In his own visionary world, because his life was full of visions and direct transmissions from Buddhas, from Bodhisattvas. Then the Shangpa Kagyu tradition that he received directly from visions of Niguma, Naropa's consort, was very powerful. The Chut practice was also very powerful, that he received from the Machik tradition. So he was an accomplished Buddhist master. He was a Mahasiddha with great skills. And amongst his famous skills was the power to remove epidemics and sickness. And so in his lifetime, we find him going to areas, removing sickness, very, very aware of sicknesses related to non-human beings, what we would call spirits or forces, and able to overcome them and help people to health. He's very famous for his building work. So many monasteries and stupas. but more than anything, iron bridges. So I'd like to just share a couple of images. Where are we? First of all, this one. So I think I can. Here. Could you put a hand up if you can see? Yep, good. Okay, so because he lived so long, he is depicted as a sage with long white hair. And then you can see in his right hand, he's holding a vase with an elixir of immortality. Now, the mastery of the Mahasiddha teachings on immortality, he had that mastery, and it enabled him to have a long life and also to teach those practices, to either insert them or renew them in various Tibetan traditions. But then you'll see in his left hand, he's holding chains. Now, this, if you've got a scientific mind or chemist's mind, this becomes fascinating, because he was famous for building iron bridges in Tibet. The story starts, now it seems he was how can you say, unconventional, I would like to say. I don't want to use the term crazy yogi, because I think people get weird ideas when they use that term. But anyway, let's say he was rather unconventional in his appearance and sometimes in his behavior. That's another story, that's not for today. But at one point he wanted to get across this big river in central Tibet, which is called the Brahmaputra. It's a very, very wide river. It's where Akon Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe were ambushed, and where so many of their party were killed. It's a big river to get across. And so he wanted to take the ferry, but I think he didn't have anything to pay for it. And then he looked, what he was saying made the ferry people think he was a nutcase. So not only would they not take him on the ferry, but they actually beat him up. It says they had oars to row the ferry. They actually beat him with those things. And as a result of that, this is what happens when you're a bodhisattva. Something horrible happens to you and a lot of benefit comes out of it. He had a vision. He had a vision of building bridges over rivers in Tibet. Now, you need to know about rivers in Tibet. They're very powerful and they can flood and swell so easily. And because Tibet is the place that it's in, so many of Asia's great rivers come down off the plateau and they cut up the plateau. You can't travel without crossing rivers. There's only two ways to get across a river. It's a boat, a coracle, or a bridge. And otherwise, as an individual traveler, but especially if you've got livestock, if you're carrying goods and grains or anything, then you've got to get it all safely across a river or go around a long, long way, a long detour to find a bridge. So Tangtong Gyalpo built these suspension bridges. Of course, you can build them with rope, and rope's fairly easy to make. It's an art that goes back to primitive times. But he made them with iron chains. The iron of those chains is stainless steel. You have the manufacture of stainless steel in Tibet. Now, this art, actually, some people research it, it goes back a long way, and I mustn't spend too much time on it. although I've spent lots of hours this week reading up about it and doing research into these bridges. But he was Mahasiddhas. Mahasiddhas are alchemists, amongst other things. They know so much about the natural world, about the herbs, about the minerals, about the power, the latent power that's in there. So there is a technique for making stainless steel that we find in ancient Japan. We find it in some Roman swords. And it's mainly you either introduce into the mix an iron that's very rich in arsenic. So then you need to be a blacksmith who can heat up arsenic and not drop dead through the fumes and so on. It's a skill. It's a skill. Or you make a piece of iron, like a link of a chain, and then you dip it in molten arsenic-rich iron, which is the case with Tangtong Gyalpo. He made some big bridges in Bhutan and all the way across Tibet, 58 major bridges weighing, where the iron weighs many, many tons. So he's famous for getting that done. Whether he actually taught the technique or whether he went to places where that technique was preserved is not 100% clear. But it seems that in Paro, in Bhutan, there were people who could do this. So he had the iron chain links made in Bhutan and carried in hundreds of yak loads over 6,000 meter, whatever it is, high passes, I forget the number, all the way to central Tibet and further. So that is just amazing. And it's out of his heartfelt service to Tibetans whose lives were completely changed by this ability to be able to go across this river, which they couldn't before. So anyway, he's very, very famous for building these amazing bridges, not just getting the iron made, having it transported, but across a big river, it's a huge weight once you put the iron links together and make the chain, to lift it up, to put it into place, to anchor it at each end. So I think I've got another picture of one. Let's see. Yes, here. This is one in Paro in Bhutan. Now, can you put a hand up if you can see? Nice to double check. You can't see? You can't see a bridge? Yeah, you can. Good. So if you look, I don't know if you can see my mouse moving. On the left or the right-hand side, just below the prayer flags, can you see those iron links? Yeah. If you've got a big screen like I do, it's easier. If you're on the telephone, it might not be so easy. They're the originals. They're the links that were made using alchemical or stainless steel. Anyway, once you've got those in place, then you can put ropes, sticks, and all kinds of other things so that people and animals can get across. So he made sort of 58 like this in his lifetime. And I wanted to show one more picture. Here we are. This one. This is Degi in Tibet. Degi is very, very famous for its printing house. It was a printing house established by the 8th Taisitupa. And so the Degi collections of the Kanjur, Tenjur, and many, many, many other texts, their wood blocks, are very famous. I visited there in year 2000. Now, all of these prayer flags up on the hill are around a cave where Tangtong Gyalpo spent years in meditation. I was suffering from altitude sickness at the time, So I got halfway up that hill. I didn't have the blessing of getting all the way to the cave, but it was better not to go up better not to die than to go up any further, maybe. But anyway, it's a very powerful memory for me, the memory of this hillside. And it's one of the many places in his travels where he meditated. So what we're going to be studying together is a practice that he received now all of his life, because he was an emanation of Chenrezig, because he was in the Pure Lands. He was never separate from the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas. And there are outer biographies of him, and there are inner and secret biographies. One of them that's been lost was in a monastery, and it would look like blank paper until you dipped it into water. And then you read some of the secret biography of Tang Tong Gyalpo. And so in there, not just once, but many times, various bodhisattvas, and in particular his own pure essence as Chenrezig, inspired him to give a practice that everyone could do, that would at one and the same time be simple, but as deep can go. And so the practice, the text that we recite and that we'll study, comes from him. So I think that's all I've got time to say about him today. If you're interested, there is a biography that's by Cyrus Stearns, and it's called King of the Empty Plain, which is a translation of his name. Tang Tong means empty plain, and Gyalpo means king. So he came from the great northern plains of Tibet, and he traveled all over. But anyway, it's a very, very interesting book to read. A great job of research as well. Cyrus Stearns, King of the Empty Plain. So we get the practice from him, and what we'll study is how to do that practice, given to us, so a commentary given to us by the 15th Jawa Karmapa, Kachap Dorji. Of course, like all the Karmapas, what can Ken Holmes say to tell you how wonderful a Karmapa is? When we look at Kachap Dorji's life, he too traveled, did so many things to help sentient beings, did a lot of peacemaking work in Tibet, in China, and so on. But anyway, and then towards the end of his life, he's a Karmapa who took, whatever you call it, consorts, wives, two and two, and then from him we get the Kase Control, one of the five emanations of the first Jamgon Control. And Kase Control, if like me you're connected to Akon Rinpoche, he's the one whose life was saved by Akon Rinpoche. He's the one who was very, very ill. Tibetan medicine couldn't save him. Various blessings from teachers couldn't save him. And they said, you should go to Lama Akon, the first Akon, which he did. And then he was cured, and very, very grateful. So, and then Akon Rinpoche's monastery, Dolma Lakan, didn't want a tulku reincarnation. They've been doing very well for hundreds of years, just very, very wisely too. They just looked, when their abbot died, they just looked amongst themselves and thought, who's the purest, who's the wisest, who's going to be the best person? And they'd seen things go wrong with the tulku system in Tibet, let's say. So they didn't want a tulku, never had one, didn't want one. They were mainly a yogi's monastery. There were about 30 smaller monasteries, nunneries. But Kase Control insisted, once the first Akon died, you've got to find his reincarnation. Anyway, that's another story. We won't go there today. How these grumbling people, and he sent them to the Karmapa, 16th Karmapa, so that they could be sure to get the right reincarnation. So anyway, the 15th Karmapa, a very, very, very great being, gave us the explanation. So the original text is by Tangtong Gyalpo is called Bringing Benefit to Limitless Beings. And then the Karmapa's commentary is called A Continuous Rain to Benefit Beings, which has been translated a couple of times into English. Ken MacLeod, Tyler Dewar, and so on. Now, next week, I'll send you a copy. I just want to edit 1 or 2 words in it so that it's got Ken's flavor. Excuse me for doing that. So I've pinched somebody else's translation, and rather than do the whole thing from the beginning, then I'd like to make it so that it uses the vocabulary I use. I'll be sending you the 15th Karmapa's commentary, which is the basis for our notes. Now, so what we're going to do is we're going to practice together. It's how we learn. The reason I'm keen, and I have been for many years, on giving these Chenrezig teachings, and the why it's called Bringing It to Life, is because I found lots of people who practice Chenrezig and who've done it for years, and there's benefit, without any doubt. Benefit they feel, and then looking from the outside through Dharma eyes, I'm sure there's a benefit that will go with them into the bardo between lives and will bring an enormous benefit in their future lives. But there are a couple of things. One is they've learned how to do the practice, how it's done in Dharma centers. So they can join in. But unless your Dharma center is very, very good, the way it's done in Dharma centers is not the most useful. Because of that, then the second point is that people do it as a ritual, as a practice you can join in with. What I mean by that is a ritual and not as a path. If you practice something as a ritual, it means you do it now. You do it in 5 years' time, you do it the same. You do it in 20 years' time, and you can join in at your Dharma center. Nothing changes. It's like taking a shower. You get dirty, you take a shower. You live, you sit down, you do the Chenrezig practice, you feel a lot better for it. There's a blessing, there's some connection. But the connection you feel this year is the same as you felt 25 years ago. Whereas it is a practice with a path is something we should do professionally and with a view to changing year after year, so that your practice is a journey of awakening, of more and more connection with the real Chenrezig, so that in the end, it's not ended yet, but further along the line, let's say, what will happen to you? Now, if your Chenrezig practice is a path and not a ritual you perform, what will happen to you is your ego will disappear. You'll still have your karma. Somewhere down there on planet Earth, there'll still be Ken Holmes, or there'll still be you. And you'll have the same brothers, sisters, fathers, the same relative karma where you're rich, poor, whatever it is. That'll be going on. But you won't be experiencing that through an egotistic mind of pride, self-pity, all the rest of it. Your default me feeling will be nourished from an endless resource, which is the real Chenrezig. You'll see your life as one of hundreds of lives that you are witnessing, no different between you and others. That can happen. That can happen to you, to me, in this life, if Chenrezig practice is a practice So for that, we need to learn how to do it. Because it's a practice, each step, we'll analyze it in 4 main parts. Sometimes we can make that 6 main parts. Six main parts. Each part is something to be worked on year after year after year. Not just something you sit down. Like the first 2 lines. Sanje che dan soji chonam na janchu bado dane chapsunche. Refuge. Now people, when they do Chenrezig practice as a ritual, do that. Sanje chadan sanje chona and the chanting of it and the knowing refuge, that's refuge bit, is kind of what you do. Refuge in itself, Taisitupa says, could be everything you ever need. Our refuge understanding just goes deep and deep. What do you say? Sanje, Buddha. What's Buddha? Do you know what Buddha is? No. You are learning. Do you know the 60 qualities of Buddha's speech? Do you know the 64 qualities, the most obvious qualities of a Buddha? Do you know what are Dhammakaya, Sambhogakaya, Nimanakaya? Do you have experience of Nimanakaya and what that is? And so on and so on. Sanje, Che is Dhamma. Dhamma is immense, and not just immense, it goes deeper and deeper. So what you understood yesterday, you understand deeper today, and you just can't tell anybody about it. Every part of Chenrezig practice is such a wonderful tool to make deeper. So I want to help you in this brief course. It's called Bringing Chenrezig to Life. Chenrezig's very alive. We don't need to do anything for Chenrezig, but our connection with Chenrezig needs to be alive. Now, this brings me on to another point. Not easy. And it's about Vajrayana practice. It's about Vajrayana practice in general, something that's very, very, very important in our Kagyu tradition. And this is faith and devotion and trust. If faith and trusting the process is beyond you, can't mince my words, you may be better off practicing mindfulness, shamatha, and all the many, many wonderful Buddhist practice. But if you want Chenrezig, or Mahamudra practice, or the foundation practices to really work for you, then there is no doubt that it is to do with faith. In our last course, when we looked at the 5 Buddha families, we saw how Buddha is there all the time, the manifestations of the 5 families, here with us, around us, all the time, but we can't see it. We are locked up inside our relative stream of consciousness. So the whole point is how to break those walls of consciousness that are a prison, that are a limitation, that are getting us and everybody into trouble. How to break through them. And faith and devotion, trust, is the main thing. If in our hearts we can open with trust, Chenrezig is already there. So we can make the connection. That's what the practice is about. At one and the same time, the practice itself is a template, it's a training for what will happen to you and to me. So when we go through the stages of the practice, we start off taking refuge in something which is very distant. And then we bring Chenrezig closer, right above our own head, and in the form of our own guru. And then we build a deeper relationship between who we are right now, a relative being, and our timeless compassion, but where they're still dualistic. And then we learn through total openness and faith for the two to become one, so that we become Chenrezig, and then we do the mantra and the practice as Chenrezig. Chenrezig dissolves into the vastness of shunyata in the completion stage of the practice. And then in between practice sessions, we learn how to bring the practice into daily life. So we're actually setting in our mind a template for our own future spiritual evolution when we go through the stages of the practice. Now, I wanted to share another image with you. If I can find it. Yes, this one. Can you see? Put a hand up if you can see, yeah. So this is Lama Lacho, or Lamcho, depending how you pronounce his name. Now, Lama Lamcho is the person that I first got the transmission of the four-arm Chenrezig practice from. He's Khenpo Lamcho, he was. So he was Khenpo, like so many Khenpos, like the previous Kala Rinpoche, like Khenpo Sotim Jamso, Khenpo Lamcho. They were masters in the monastic universities, and they left. They all left to practice, to get the deep realization. So he left his Khenpoing, he traveled in Tibet, and he practiced nothing but Om Mani Padme Hum, and he learned wherever he could all the different Chenrezig traditions. He studied the Chenrezig scriptures. So he became what they call a Manipa. Mani is Om Mani Padme Hum. So, and then he started leading groups of people doing 100 million Mani mantras. Many, many times. Now the benefits of the doing 100 million Om Mani Padme Hums are amazing. He was in Samuling when the 16th Jawa Karmapa came there, and Karmapa told us, Karmapa had such a love and respect for him. He knew him from before. And he said, you must treasure him because amongst you, you have a real living bodhisattva. In Tibet, people would come to him for healing by touch because his body was special through his practice of Om Mani Padme Hum, through his own total faith. So his body had a special smell. You read about this in the scriptures. It's the smell of pure conduct, pure mind. Even though he was not young, I think he was in his 70s, his flesh was like the flesh of a child through his practice of Om Mani Padme Hum. Just amazing when he was bare arms and you could touch. The flesh had such a, I cannot describe it, a glow to it, and like total unspoiled youth. Anyway, he gave us the transmission and the teachings, and because he was a Khenpo, Akon Rinpoche sent us to him to study Khenpo topics, to study Dharma in its details. And every time he'd say, oh, turning a prayer wheel, this prayer wheel. Let me stop the picture now. So he will be turning this prayer wheel, and we'd be asking questions about the fifth aspect of consciousness or something like this. And he'd just look and say, oh, why do you need to know all of this? All you need to do is Om Mani Padme Hum with faith. And he said, yeah, but Akon Rinpoche sent us because we've got to get this sorted. And then, of course, he'd give wonderful answers. Now, what I didn't point out when you had the image is that big prayer wheel he has was the prayer wheel of the 15th Jawa Karmapa, who gave us the commentary explaining how to do this practice. So that was, I'm not sure where he got it, but because he was such a great proponent of the Om Mani Padme Hum, then that was given to him And he turned it all the time, sitting down in the shrine room, walking around. We used to go walking with him, circumambulating. And all the time he was turning the wheel. It became a prayer wheel moment. We all started buying or making prayer wheels in Sameleng. And Graham Ritter is not with us today. He's been on some of our courses. He got the whole transmission about making prayer wheels and went off. And because he had some motorbike knowledge, engineering knowledge, these prayer wheels had the most amazing ball bearings, and they turned like a beautiful bit of technology. Anyway, the transmission of this practice I first got from Khenpo Lamcho and from the first Kalu Rinpoche, mainly, of course, from Akon Rinpoche. Then together in Sameling, we did 100 million Om Mani Padme Hongs. So I think that's as much background as I can do today. Of course, there's a lot more. I wanted to explain how when we do the practice, we are embodying who we really are, which is Buddha. We are switching off our relative delusion, ego, and so on. And we're allowing ourselves to be the body and the speech and the mind of Chenrezig, the compassion of all the Buddhas. So I'd like to finish. I've gone a little bit over my usual time, but anyway, I'd like to finish by reading to you from a book I think many of you know. It's called The Heart Treasure of the Enlightened Ones. So this book is a commentary on Patrul Rinpoche's text, good in the beginning, middle, and end. One of the things I was going to tell you is that Chenrezig manifested as Padmasambhava Guru Rinpoche, and then later on as Tangtong Gyalpo, and of course as the Karmapas and many other masters. So I'd like to read to you from this. Chenrezig has appeared in this dark age in the person of Guru Rinpoche, whose wisdom, compassion, and power are swifter than those of any other Buddha. For it was specifically to benefit beings of this age that he had made prayers of aspiration. Chenrezig manifests infinite forms, kings, spiritual teachers, ordinary men and women, wild animals, even as mountains, as trees, or as bridges, whatever is necessary to fulfill sentient beings' needs. Even a cool breeze in scorching weather, or a soothing moment of relief during a painful illness, are manifestations of Chenrezig's compassion. Similarly, Chenrezig's six-syllable mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, is the compassionate wisdom of all the Buddhas manifested as sound. Within it is contained the essential meaning of all 84,000 sections of the Buddha's teaching, of all the many mantras of various kinds, such as awareness mantras, dharanas, and secret mantras. Not one is superior to the 6 syllables of Chenrezig. The great benefits of reciting this mantra are described again and again in both sutras and tantras. It's said that to recite the mani even once is the same as reciting the whole of the 12 branches of Buddha's teaching. Reciting the 6 syllables perfects the 6 paramitas and firmly blocks any possibility of rebirth in the 6 realms. It's a simple practice, easy to understand, accessible to all, and at the same time, it contains the very essence of the Dharma. If you take the mani as your refuge, both in happiness and in sorrow, Chenrezig will always be with you. You will feel more and more devotion without any effort, and all by itself, the realizations of the Mahayana path will arise in your being. According to the Gandharva Sutra, if you recite 100 million manis, all the myriad living organisms in your body will be blessed by Chenrezig. And when you die, even the smoke from the cremation of your corpse will have the power to protect whoever inhales it. Even a single syllable of the mantra, Om or Ma or Ni, carries unimaginable power to bless and liberate beings. It is said that a Buddha is capable of extraordinary feats beyond the capacity of others, such as stating exactly how many drops of rain would fall during a rainstorm lasting 12 years. Yep, Buddha could tell you exactly in that 12-year rainstorm how many drops fell. But even Buddha would not be able fully to describe the merit generated by a single recitation of the mani. Were he to so much as begin such a description, even if all the forests on earth were made into paper, there would never be enough to write down more than the minutest part. So there's a lot, but I think you get the idea. I'd like to skip to a page or two further in Patrul Rinpoche. Now, he was a very, very experienced, in his modern Patrul Rinpoche is not that far away in history. Respected so much by all Tibetans. And like a later version of Milarepa, he lived out in the wilds. He wasn't parked in a monastery, lived in a tent, lived in hollows in the ground. And so he's very respected. What can you say? He'd done lots of traditional Dharma, the studies and all the other things. He'd studied, for instance, I think more than 14 times, the mind training and so on. Anyway, so he says, whatever I know from before, I've left it as theory. It's no use to me now. Whatever I've done, I've spent on this life, and spent on this life, it's no use to me now. Whatever I've thought, it was all just illusion. It's no use to me now. Now the time has come to do what truly is useful, to recite the 6-syllable mantra. And then he goes on, the whole text. Now, the reason this is important, and that some other texts are important from other teachers like Chami Rinpoche, is that they were great masters of Dzogchen, in Patrul Rinpoche's case, and then Mahamudra. They combined and they showed how the very deepest of meditation teachings, our Chenrezig, can be combined with Chenrezig. And there are some wonderful texts. There's what's called a matri about the union of Mahamudra and Dzogchen through the Chenrezig practice that Domo Choji Rinpoche taught in Samiling some time ago. And I had the honor of interpreting. So anyway, it's to impress upon you what a wonderful thing we're embarking on. How it is about opening and faith so that we connect with what is through the bridge of Chenrezig. Just like now we're communicating through the bridge of Zoom, through the bridge of Chenrezig, we will be communicating with the timeless, perfect, unconditional, great compassion of all the Buddhas. So let's dedicate this talk, and then we have 10-15 minutes together for discussion. Sonam di tamche zikpane, topne nyepe dranam Pamchene, Jegana Chipalap, Trukpaye, Sipe Sole Drowa, Drowarisho. Janchub Semcho, Rinpoche, Maje Panam, Jejochi, Jepa Nyampa Me Padam, Kongne, Kongdo, Kalwarisho. Gewadi Nyotuda, Chenrezig Wan Rupjune, Rowachi Jamalupa, Deye Sala, Kukarasho.